Thank you very much and welcome everyone. I wanted this evening really to answer the question very briefly, why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why are you here? Why are we discussing what we're going to discuss? And I want to start with the why, which is in some respects obvious, but it bears saying, which is, as I think everyone in this room is acutely aware, nature is suffering grievous damage across the world. It's under enormous threat, and that has vast consequences. We're an organisation that tends to look at things through a species lens, and the number of species that are going extinct, the number of species that are at threat of going extinct is absolutely terrifying. We also tend to look at things through an ecosystem lens, and the damage being done across the world in different ecosystems is terrifying. I saw a figure this week about the percentage of the Great Barrier Reef that was now functionally dead. And this was something that I grew up thinking was a forever thing, that the Great Barrier Reef was one of those things that was just there, and it would always be there, and you could visit. And the idea that this extraordinary, large, incredibly important ecosystem should be dying in front of our eyes just brought home to me what it is that we're dealing with. Beyond species and ecosystems, the natural systems on which we rely incredibly heavily, the sorts of nature services, ecosystem services, which if they're taken away, will feel incredibly sharply. We are overusing them to an extraordinary degree. And for those who haven't seen it, the report by the Cambridge economist Partha Dasgupta, the Dasgupta report, sets out in really scary detail quite how much we are overusing ecosystem services. And the impact of that is not simply that nature's suffering and it's very sad. The impact of that is in the recent report by the World Economic Forum on economic risks. Risks from nature are right at the top, literally at the top, because if those ecosystem services stop functioning, the impact on the economy is huge. So we're here because we all care about nature, but we're also here, I think, because we know that there is something really important here that we're going to have to tackle. Second part is why we here, as in why you in London Zoo talking about it. And I think it's worth just explaining the zoo is one part of ZSL, the Zoological Society of London. And we are, at heart, a science-driven conservation charity. We've got three elements. One is our two zoos, and they're brilliant for public engagement. We have over 2 million people through a year, and we get a captive audience who we can talk to and inspire about nature. We have our scientific institute, 100 scientists, 60 PhD students doing brilliant research at the cutting edge of conservation biology. And we've got our conservation programme, of which Oliver's team is an important part, but we have field offices across Asia and Africa, so that we can, in a single organisation, go from research in the laboratory to trying stuff out in the field, to engaging with companies, head office out in the West Congo Basin or the Philippines or wherever it is. So we have an interesting perspective that I hope will inform this evening's discussion. So that's why we're here. And then why are we here? Why this group of people? And I think it's because the damage being done to nature obviously matters for its own sake. When a species goes extinct, it's a real gut-wrenching tragedy. But also, anyone who is in business, invested in business, interested in business, also needs to understand how biodiversity loss and the impact on business intersect. Because from any number of angles, business is now having to grapple with this, and investment needs to grapple with this. So in terms of risk, I already mentioned the WEF report. Any business of any scale will be subject to the risk of ecosystem service failure. And if a business isn't thinking about it, it really needs to. If a business isn't thinking about the reputational risk of its own footprint on nature and its supply chain's footprint on nature, it needs to, because its consumers are increasingly vocal about what they expect from the companies they do business with. Its employees and its potential employees are increasingly focused on biodiversity loss. And all the research from the next generation of the workforce is really clear. These are people who care profoundly about nature. And a company which is interested in recruiting talent from that generation needs to have something to say on it. And investors are increasingly vocal about impact on nature and what impact their investment is having on nature. And then if that weren't enough, we can see now and coming down the pipeline at us, increasing amounts of nature-based regulation, whether it's the EU's forestry directive or the equivalent that's going to be placed in place in the UK, the recommendations being put in place by the UN for regulation. Companies are going to have to operate in an environment where regulation around nature is part of what they do. So there's a whole set of reasons why business and investors need to be alive to this. But there's an even more important reason, which is business and investors have real agency to tackle this problem. ZSL, along with other conservation organisations, can deal with the symptoms. We can mitigate some of the damage. And if we're lucky, we can start to address a bit of the cause. But fundamentally, this is never going to work. We're never going to be able to do what we need to do at the scale we need to do to roll back the damage we're doing to nature collectively, unless we can tackle the problem at its root cause. And that means tackling the economic drivers of biodiversity loss. And tonight we're going to be hearing about two of the key elements of how we do that. What we do about supply chains and what we do around nature financing. And the really good news, and this is the note I'll end on, the really good news is we know that if we get it right, if we get the economic drivers right, if we work on rolling back the damage we've done based on science and the knowledge of how, of what's worked in the past, then nature can recover, that you can slow down deforestation, that you can see ecosystems which were damaged recover their strength and their biodiversity. Whether that's the Amazon, where the rate of deforestation has slowed quite dramatically, or Indonesia, where changes to key supply chains have had a really quick, direct effect on nature loss. We know that an alliance of the sectors and the people in this room, between the conservationists and the scientists, the business leaders, the investors, can and is making a difference. So thank you for coming. Together we can tackle what must be, for me, the most important issue facing the world. Very grateful to you for giving up your evening, and we'll look forward to the discussions.
I think that's a fantastic introduction to why this is such an important issue. And our first panel is going to look a bit more at the how do we tackle the issue. So how can business and finance sector decision making actually halt deforestation and biodiversity loss? So we know from our own data at ZSL, we produced a Living Planet Index, which has shown a average rate of decline in key vertebrate species of 69% between 1970 and 2018. So the evidence is clear. We know the biodiversity crisis is equally as important, equally as worrying as the climate crisis, if not more. And we know that business financing of supply chains is one of the leading causes of that biodiversity loss. Land use change as the leading biodiversity loss driver. Around 90% of deforestation is caused by conversion of forest to agricultural land. And with that major impact comes a major opportunity to bend the curve on biodiversity loss, to restore and regenerate nature. So I'm hoping our first panel will bring some insights on how can we do this. So panel, please come and join us on the stage. First up, we've got Annabelle Dodson, who's going to tell us a little bit about SPOT and our ESG data set that ZSL has been working on for the past 10 years. We've got Sophie Salis from the Retail Consortium, who's going to speak about how retailers are addressing deforestation and biodiversity loss in supply chains. And then Harry Lucas from Scottish Widows about how to tackle this as a pension fund. So, Annabelle, over to you.
So I joined ZSL in 2015, and at that time there was a lot of media attention on the palm oil industry. So I'm sure you'll remember the Southeast Asian haze crisis caused by large-scale slash and burn, or the calls for boycotts of patella due to their use of palm oil. And at this time, companies' public disclosures on ESG topics was fairly new. And that year, for the first time, the world's largest palm oil trader made its first public zero deforestation policy. So while it's encouraging to see how far the palm oil sector has come in the past 9 years, there's still a lot of work to be done. We've seen a 2/3 decline in the average size of global wildlife populations in less than 50 years, and land use change is still the biggest current threat to nature, with over 90% of deforestation worldwide being driven by the trade in global commodities like beef, soy and palm oil. And this is a problem not just for the nature we're losing, but for the private sector. Over half of the world's GDP is dependent on nature, and in 2020, for the first time, the top 5 risks to business and the economy were all environmental. Corporate transparency in the soft commodity sector is one of the first crucial steps towards mitigating these issues. And with emerging regulatory requirements, such as the 2025 EUDR, stakeholders need information more than ever about how company progress towards things like eliminating deforestation and ecosystem conversion from their supply chains is so important. So we need to keep encouraging these companies to keep disclosing. And we've been doing this through SPOT now for the past 10 years. For those of you less familiar with SPOT, we started in 2014, and we now assess 230 of the world's largest palm oil, timber and pulp, and natural rubber companies, including producers, processors, and traders. Companies are assessed on their public disclosures across 10 ESG categories, with higher scores being awarded for more comprehensive policies and externally verified information. So now we have 10 years of data and over 220,000 data points. I wanted to just share a few insights with you today. So when we first started assessing companies, we were always asked, we have these policies, why do we need to make them publicly available? But attitudes have started to shift, and we did see scores go up. So the palm oil sector, which we've been assessing from the beginning since 2014, has increased its scores over the years, but the average score is still under 50%, so there's still a long way to go. The rubber sector, despite being the most recent commodity we added to SPOT in 2019, has almost caught up the palm oil sector, despite the years of pressure that the palm oil sector's had to improve. The timber and pulp sector, on the other hand, despite being assessed at 2017, has only got an average score of 23%, so we really need to be putting more pressure on these companies. We just highlight 3 key ESG indicator scores. First, given the upcoming EUDR, I wanted to touch on the spatial data indicators, because if you don't know where you're sourcing from, how do you know that a company's sustainability claims are credible? while the EUDR doesn't require maps to be publicly available, it would give a lot more faith to the financiers and buyers who need this information. And at the moment, only 23% of spatial data indicators are scoring 4 points on spot. Second, and also concerning, is that across the board, all 3 commodities that we assess, the lowest scoring category is the smallholders and suppliers category. Smallholders are a key part of many supply chains, and supporting them is crucial to delivering sustainability and improving livelihoods in producing countries. Third, fewer than half of companies we assessed report having a high-level management position responsible for sustainability. And this is really important because it ensures that sustainability is embedded into a company's core strategy and decision-making. So Spot really provides a deep dive data set on a number of companies, but in the last few years we've been working on a partnership with Global Canopy and SEI York to develop Forest IQ. And this brings together a wide range of data, including Spot and Forest 500, on how more than 2,000 major companies are addressing their links to deforestation. So it provides a greater coverage of companies and commodities and makes it more useful for financial institutions to screen their portfolios and support at-risk company engagement. So the private sector is uniquely placed to influence companies in their journey to becoming nature positive. So if you haven't seen these data sets already, I'd encourage you all to take a look. That was a very short and sweet presentation from me, and I have to say
Thank you, Annabelle. And then I guess one of the challenges is making sure we have the correct data. Decision making can only be done well with exactly this kind of data. And deforestation is one of the trickiest issues, one of the issues that we know is not going away, even though we need it to. We need much more action, and those figures there of just the level or the lack of corporate disclosure after 10 years is worrying. Next up, we've got Sophie DeSalis from the BRC. Sophie is a sustainable policy advisor at BRC, essentially helping to navigate the retail sector and set stringent guidelines for biodiversity and helping to eliminate this deforestation. Companies that are a very long way away from where deforestation is happening, but they need to be able to empower supply chains and work with those supply chains to eliminate that in their supply chains. So, Sophie.
Thanks, Ollie, and thanks to ZSL for having me here today. So if you don't know the BRC, we are the go-to trade association for British retail in the UK, and I am their responsible sourcing lead, so look after all the grizzly stuff and supply chains. So the issue, well, we know that retailers have a huge role to play when looking at deforestation, not least because the products that we as retailers sell are directly linked to deforestation and, in fact, of the drivers. So the products all on this side of the screen are commodities that are linked to deforestation, and I think there's so often in the minds of consumers, lack of understanding as to the kind of embedded commodities versus the raw materials that we know well, so palm oil, cocoa, coffee, soy, I'm going to forget something, rubber, pulp, timber, etc. So these commodities and our consumption of them are driving deforestation, and they are having a huge impact. So they're having a huge impact on the planet, but they're also having a huge impact on businesses. Because if I'm honest, deforestation is bad for business. It's bad for business for a couple of reasons, because when I'm going to look cynically from my business lens, it's all about supply chain resilience and security. So, with deforestation, we're losing essential habitats and ecosystems that will help our forests thrive. We're losing the lungs of the earth, and we're losing that resilience to extreme weather conditions, and all of that is bad for business because it means that we're unable to source from, well, we're animal to source, and that means that consumers will be unhappy, and that's a reputational risk. And when something like over 55% of our GDP, our world's GDP, is dependent on nature, this is something that retailers should be and are actually thinking about. It's sending alarm bells ringing, and that has caused some significant action. So when we look at the individual level, a number of companies have been working to investigate their exposure to deforestation by doing a risk analysis, both internal and external. But when they're doing this, they understand that it's not just something that they're responsible for, because no man is an island, and that requires group or collective action. So this is where the BRC comes in, and also other initiatives. But there are some key initiatives out there that are helping retailers meet their targets on deforestation. So starting with the WWF basket, and this is a non-exhaustive list, and that's a set of goals and outcomes to help retailers meet their environmental goals by 2030 and reduce the footprint of our baskets. We also have the BRC's Climate Action Roadmap, the UK Sustainable Commodity Initiative, and the Soy Manifesto, which is a key initiative in committing a number of stakeholders to deforestation-free shipments of soy to the UK by latest 2025. But there's also the stick involved here, because sadly not everyone is a BRC member and not a good retailer. So there's EUDR, which you're all probably familiar with this by now. And then the UK have their own style EUDR regs, which are the Forest Risk Commodity Regulation. That is currently on pause as we await a new government. But all of this is a significant challenge, because sometimes supply chains, most of the time, they look like this. And this is a simple poultry supply chain. But as you can see, the retailer is so far away from the source of their products, especially when they're embedded. And you can imagine that this is a huge challenge for those with palm oil or soy, when it's a tiny fragment of the product. There's also a bit of a political angle here. So since we're no longer, or the UK is no longer a member of the EU, and we are going it alone, but EUDR is having a Brussels effect on retailers in the UK, not least because of Northern Ireland. We still don't know how EUDR will apply in Northern Ireland, and we still don't know how the UK Forest Risk Commodity Regulations align or diverge with EUDR. And EUDR is coming fast, and I'm furious. So we will have to comply by the 31st of December 2024 for those operating in the EU. But there's also a number of other things that we need to think about, and not least because in this conversation and in this conversation about deforestation, we need to think about nature and biodiversity. And that is something that retailers are starting to look at as well, with TNFD and all the kind of informal or voluntary frameworks that are coming out. But it's definitely something we're at the foothills of, and we need to consider not just halting deforestation, but also reforestation and thinking about the habitats that live in our forests and rainforests. But I will leave you with some positive notes, positivity, because all of this regulation, all these new requirements, whilst burdensome, it is an opportunity. And if we are able to future-proof our businesses and think about our resilient supply chains, then we are more sustainable as a business going forward. So, yeah.
hard task corralling retailers, and retailers have got a hard task corralling the supply chain. Maybe a little harder even still is if you are in the financial industry and you've got exposure to thousands of companies that may themselves have a distant impact on biodiversity on forests. So next up we've got Harry Lucas and Fergus Campbell, who are going to say a little bit about the work that ZSL and Scottish Widows have been doing together. Harry's got a decade of experience at Scottish Widows and has more recently moved into the responsible investment team, trying to tackle exactly these types of issues. How do you gather ESG data? How do you use that in a meaningful way to interpret and impact on how you're financing supply chains and companies that have impact on biodiversity? Interested to know you also have a farm that you are trying to essentially rewild, so maybe that will inform your comments on the portfolio as well. Harry.
Thank you, Holly. So we haven't got much time, so first of all, it's great to be here at the Zoo with you all. We haven't got much time, so I'm just going to set the scene very quickly. Scottish Widows is a 200-year-old insurance company. We are we're now part of Lloyds Banking Group. We have 10 million policyholders and 200 billion assets underpinning mostly lifetime savings. So to set the scene, we had a bit of a teaching by ZSL, the Finance and Biodiversity and Finance course a year ago, and following that, we found it really good, and following that, we decided to get the experts in conservation to help us with our initial foray into mapping impacts and dependencies. And obviously, we feel it's very urgent, as an asset owner, very urgent topic to tackle, and I'm going to let Fergus give a whistle-stop overview of what's happening so far.
Thanks, Harry. So yeah, I'm just going to give a very high-level overview of the objectives and also some of the outcomes from this project. ZSL have been working with Scottish Widows for about a year now, helping them to map their biodiversity impacts and dependencies across their really vast portfolio of investments. We've been working closely with members of their investment and stewardship teams to achieve a number of different objectives. Firstly, we really wanted to understand the current landscape of biodiversity tools and data sets that are available to the finance sector, and use this to uncover the most effective and practical way to map biodiversity impacts across a large, or some would say a universal owner portfolio. We found when looking at the data sets available and some of the footprinting tools that a lot of them weren't really adequate for what we were trying to do. A lot of the footprinting tools were lacking in some of the key facets of biodiversity, such as marine ecosystems, and some, or if not all, were kind of focused on the impact side without really looking and taking a double materiality approach to look at dependencies as well, which is really important, so dependencies on ecosystem services. This led us to create a bespoke methodology with the aim of creating findings that would help both the risk and stewardship teams within Scottish Widows. The exercise was also a bit of a capacity building one, and we wanted to help set up Scottish Widows with the tools that they can use into the future to really take action on biodiversity. And we hope that the learnings from this will also guide some of the pension sector, the wider pension sector, and happy to say that we've got a full kind of white paper report coming out later this year with really practical guidance outlining our exact methodology and some of the difficulties and some of the learnings along the way. So that's what we set out to do. What did we end up with? Well, alongside the final report, we really had two key findings or deliverables from this project. One at the portfolio level and then one company specific as well. We ended up using a combination of Encore data from UNFFI and then reinforcing that with some of ZSL's own research on the less widely covered or understood drivers of biodiversity loss, such as invasive species and overexploitation of species. We use these to assign impact and dependency scores for sub-industries, which can then be used at the portfolio level to create heat maps, such as this one you see here, a very simplified version, where you can really highlight the industries of most concern within such a wide portfolio. And then you can also weight that against the Scottish Widows holdings in those sub-industries to get a real understanding of materiality. At the company level, we decide to focus on the top 1,000 companies by holding size, really those companies that Scottish Widows felt they could have the most influence on through engagement. We incorporated some more company-specific data, such as MSDR data sets, CDP, and some of the Forest IQ data that Annabelle mentioned earlier. Applied this to the top 1,000 companies, and we also decided to split out our findings according to the 5 recognised key drivers of biodiversity loss. This allows Scottish Widows to look through a thematic lens and engage on topics such as pollution, water use, and land use change. Hopefully these findings will encourage the stewardship team from within Scottish Widows to prioritise companies they want to engage with, and even zero in specific topics for engagement and actions that their investee companies can take to improve biodiversity. And hopefully also these findings and these deliverables will be a kind of evolving data sheet that the stewardship teams can use and adapt into the future.
Sorry, the illustration, it's a very simplified illustration there, it's just drawing out 12 industries, groups of sub-industries, and obviously we're looking at extent of impact, extent of dependency, and obviously in Barcelona the key driver is the prominence within our portfolio, and all these things help our kind of stewardship prioritization. Yeah, from this next step, I mean, Fergus briefly touched on it. We have the stewardship team have been doing a lot of collaborative engagement, and these results let them kind of blind spots, and in order to kind of focus on the next kind of year ahead. Moving on from that, obviously that's hiding a lot of kind of nuance and data challenges underneath. The next step obviously is kind of rolling out more data, which is more of a kind of internal as well as external challenge. And from the investment side, we're going to have to be giving some very good stories, kind of factually correct, articulate stories about impacts and dependencies to really pull our stakeholders, being trustees, senior advisors, everyone along the journey with us. Yes.
I'm James Cookington. I'm ZSL Sustainable Finance Lead. If you haven't met me, please come up and say hi. Before we move into the panel, I just wanted to say a few words about our approach to nature finance. Normally when I speak at these events, we talk about how do we close the biodiversity financing gap. We bring up graphs and charts explaining exactly where the money should go, but I wanted to take a bit of a different approach tonight. This is an image, or an image like this is probably familiar to most people in the room. It's an image of the frontier of biodiversity loss. In this case, it's from one of ZSL's project sites in eastern Angola. We can see on the right, relatively healthy Miombo woodland, and on the left, we can see how far it's been used by people to clear this woodland for agriculture. And this is something that we want to do something about. Not only do we want to halt the expansion of this frontier of loss away from our most biodiverse landscapes, but we also want to turn the tide and start moving back into restoration. And how do we do this? There's different ways we talk about, but for me it's 100% about creating value from our ecosystems. And for countries, for societies, particularly resource-poor societies, this is about economic value. It's about financial value. We need to justify the case for nature amongst other land uses. And in order to unlock that value, we need to attract substantial sums of investment. Not as much as climate, but they're still substantial. And ZSL's approach to doing this is to work on both the supply and demand side for finance. By supply, what I mean is working with financial institutions, many of whom are in this room, both to shift funds away from allocation to businesses that are actively contributing to the destruction of nature, and also shift funds towards nature positive activities. And we heard one case study tonight that's been a real pleasure to work on with Scottish Widows and Fergus. And on the other side, we work with our field teams and partners around the world to develop businesses and other revenue generating projects that can help fund the protection and restoration of nature. And we take this approach because we believe it's important to have lessons from the field and take them into the boardroom of the world's biggest financial institutions and companies. And likewise, we want to make sure that our teams aren't wasting their time on the ground. We're focused on creating projects that are capable of really genuinely making a meaningful contribution, meaningful financial contribution to biodiversity loss. So when we work with financial institutions, we're really helping them on a journey to become nature positive in line with the Kunming Montreal biodiversity targets. We do this through technical advice, through analysis, through training, through data like forest IQ, what we heard of through policy engagement. And then with our field teams and partners, we develop these nature positive businesses and projects. We do this, and what we believe ZSL's difference is firstly about relationship driven project origination. You know, we have relationships with communities, with governments, with local businesses in the landscapes in which we and our partners work, and we use those relationships to identify projects. We then develop them using a world-class science backed up by Institute of Zoology and taking a fairer approach, which means going beyond seeing local communities as beneficiaries to seeing them as rights holders and seeing these projects as a way to empower communities as they take more control over their traditional lands. And if we develop projects in this way, we know that it means that we're taking high integrity projects to market. We've seen a lot of controversy in the carbon market and similar controversies over like deforestation and so on. But we want to avoid those. We want ZSL's brand to be a sign that this is a high integrity project you can trust, you can invest in this project because it is generally creating positive impacts. And going on this journey, we've been lucky enough to partner with many of the world's leading financial institutions, and it's great to see so many of our partners and collaborators in the room today. So thank you for working with us, and we look forward to deepening and expanding those collaborations. And at the same time, we've built a rapidly growing pipeline of projects around the world that we want to take to market as investable high integrity projects. And so for the second panel, we wanted to kind of talk about a few of those projects today. So I just want to invite three people up to the stage that I have the pleasure of working with, Martin, Will, and Arena, and then we can hear a little bit more about them. Okay. First up, we have Martin from around the Merchant Bank to talk about the pipeline of wildlife impact bonds that he's been working with. Martin.
Thank you very much, James, and good evening, everyone. It's probably unusual for an investment banker to address the ZSL moment, but I think that's going to change in the future because the two industries are going to work together much closer. I'm here to talk about natural capital and how we can make nature more investable. And as you've been hearing tonight, the planet is in trouble. We've been hearing about the nightmare, but hopefully I can share a bit of the dream with you as well. The current funding model that we have isn't adequate for the problem we have. We have to intervene as humankind, but we don't have a funding model that is adequate to help solve the problem. On this slide, I show two contrasting funding models. On the left-hand side is what I call the traditional funding model, and on the right-hand side we have what I shall call dreaming from now on, having a that it might qualify as a green. The traditional funding model is one that should be familiar to all of you. We've got a limited number of entities contributing to nature and biodiversity. We've got government, we've got tourists, philanthropists, and some other donors. And it works for some areas, it works for especially iconic landscapes like the Serengeti and Yellowstone, and it will work for some iconic species as well. But the problem is it's totally inadequate for the vast area of landscape that we need to cover. The problem also is that this funding model doesn't have a lot of measurability. Transparency is limited, accountability is limited, so it's very hard to crowd in other participants, which means it's very hard to grow this model. You can maybe grow it by 10 to 20%, but we need to grow it by 10 to 20 times, and how can we get that right? I believe the answer lies in the model on the right, but before I get there, I'm going to explain to you how I think we can get there. It's by reducing investable product, getting the capital markets involved. A good example of this is the World Bank's Rhino Bond, the Vietnam Water Bond, and debt for nature swaps. What's interesting about the Rhino Bond is, in that instance, an investor's performance depends on the performance of an underlying rhino population in South Africa. So when rhinos do well, investors do well, and when rhinos don't do well, investors underperform. Now what's interesting about that is it starts to look like any other investor market, because in another investor market, let's say property, if the property does well, the investor does well, if it doesn't do well, the investor underperforms. And this is therefore creating an asset class that looks like pretty much any other asset class. How does it work? If the project works, if rhinos do well, we have another entity, independent entity called an outcomes-based funder that gets involved and starts paying for the project. On the other hand, if it's not doing well, the investor ends up paying for it through limited underperformance. No loss of capital, just a sliver of underperformance. Now, if we design something like this, where an investor is taking risk, but in the long term they don't see this as concessional funding, we can crowd in what we call mainstream investors like Nuveen, Alliance Bernstein, Legal and General, and the like. Another thing we need to do is, the problem with the Rhino Bond is that it happened 2 years and 4 months ago. It hasn't been replicated yet. There's no bank in the world that's busy forming these instruments apart from the World Bank. And we're saying that there must be a steady supply of these bonds to enable investment managers to see it as a business opportunity, so they can allocate analysts to work on this and thereby create portfolios of these bonds so it can make a much bigger difference. What that should enable us to do is create a funding model that's on your right-hand side there. There's a whole load of concentric circles. If you're sitting right at the back, you might not be able to see it, but each concentric circle represents a different category of participant. Most obvious one here from what I've said is the world of investment managers. There's $2 trillion of bonds being issued every year. If you can crowd that in, even a small percentage of that, that's a really big number that helps with biodiversity and nature. Another concentric circle there is what we call the outcomes-based funder. Those are entities that want to fund nature, but either are too risk averse or they don't have a mechanism to do so. A good example of this is an American family office that said to us they love Africa, want to fund, but they're worried about the risk of civil war, fraud, persecution, embezzlement, and the like. Our response to them is, but in this product, if any of those things happen, the project fails and you get your money back. Likewise, for a corporate that's interested in investing in biodiversity, they might not have a mechanism to do so. This provides them with that mechanism. And then thirdly, because investment returns is measured, everyone knows what is happening. You can start crowding in guarantee providers, and even if you start working on the capital structure, you can start crowding in equity investors and mezzanine funds. It's not just plain bond managers. End result of this should be a capital market that looks like any other funding market, where you have capital flowing between different participants, not just in one direction, but in two directions. Same with information that flows both ways. And in the end, the capital is going to go to the best projects, which is what we want. An advantage of this is, if we can do this at scale, and the common man on the street who's the investor starts hearing from his investment portfolio manager that his performance was great for the previous year because of the restoration of a mangrove forest, as an example, maybe his behavior can also start changing, because that chips packet that he's going to throw out the window or the sewage release from the water company is going to start impacting his own portfolio. Second advantage is, as you can hear from my accent, I'm here to represent the Global South. And this creates a responsible channel because of the transparency, accountability, and measurability of every single project that we get involved with. What we need for this, we need investment managers to invest in these, outcomes-based funders to get involved, and obviously high-quality projects. So in closing, I want to close with a little bit of an apology. I know I used a little bit of financial jargon. I'm sorry about that, but I wanted to highlight that because the financial services industry and the environmental world is going to come together for us to solve the issues that we have, and we are going to have to learn to speak each other's language. If some of that was jargon, maybe the one bottom line of thing you can take away is that there's 8 new categories or pools of capital available for environmental interventions, and hopefully that gets you excited. We are working with the ZSL on designing a portfolio of these bonds. Very excited about that. Thank you very much for the partnership we have, and thank you very much for listening.
Thanks very much, Martin. Looking forward to asking you some tricky questions about it. Next up, we've got Will, co-founder and CEO of Kumbatia Seafood, a really interesting conservation enterprise that our country manager in Kenya and myself had the privilege of working with in a previous role, and looking forward to kind of getting an update on how that's going. Thanks, Will.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Will Gertler. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Kumbatia Seafood. And as James said, Kumbatia is not my idea. It's many people's idea, and its development is many people's development. And I really have James and Goog's Kenya country manager to thank for where we are. We're not where we want to be, but where we are. So in East Africa, small-scale fishing communities have historically lacked the resources, the training, the cold chain, the financing, and other capacities to meet global north seafood standards. And that's important because the global north has near limitless demand for a lot of East African species, and market prices are 4 times local market rates. So in a part of the world where the international 60% of the people live below the international poverty line, and you can go to a new market that you can make a lot more money selling fish to, you can create massive sustainable development, and you can alleviate poverty and create working middle-class jobs at a very significant scale. So Kumbatia, in its essence, is a service provider that enables small-scale fishermen access to global north markets and the transformational economic benefits that come with that. But the caveat is that we will not give you access to this market, which can really transform your livelihoods, unless you also commit to fishing responsibly. And if they do commit to both, then things look good. And they want to commit to both because Kumbatia pays its fishermen way more than local traders and other, some local buyers also pay the fishermen. So we do this in a few ways. We train on Japanese methods of fish handling so that the fish is sushi grade or close to it. We provide Sharia compliant input and asset financing so that you can buy that new sustainable gear, so that you can get free ice, so that you can have subsidized fuel, so that you can not only sell at a higher price and sell more volume, but also reduce your expenses as well. We have an in-house traceability app so that we can help, that improves our global marketability, since traceability is important. We work with NGOs to work off a sustainability fisheries management model that's more stringent than what the government mandates, because also sustainability in the global north is good for access to the market. And then lastly, you can't sell into Europe or the US unless you have an EU or FTA certified facility. So the result is a market-based conservation incentives play where the shareholder wins, the partner fishing communities win, and marine conservation wins at large. Or at least that's what we're trying to do. So, working in the NBS startup space in a challenging market has given me a lot of long nights where I've thought about how my stakeholders can help me, but also help this sector at large. And when I think about what buyers can do, the main issue I run into is a lack of flexibility around certification requirements, especially with retailers, less so with distributors. But Kenya is not an MSC certified fishery for political reasons, for federal budgetary reasons, for other reasons that I could go into. But that doesn't mean that the fish that comes from Kenya is any less traceable, sustainable, food safe, high quality than fish from an MSC certified fishery. So if retailers can think about buying fish on kind of a case-by-case basis and vet the individual company, not the fishery that it's in, that's certified, that's really going to help global south, sustainable food system supply chain plays access global north markets where the margins are better and the ability to scale this business becomes easier. And NGOs can help that by give Kumbatia some money to send samples of its fish all across Europe. And then if a buyer has nothing to lose to receive a sample, it's much more likely to say, hey, you know what, I'm gonna order a container of octopus from Kumbatia. Because I wasn't ever gonna do that in the first place, but because that sample is subsidized, let me just give it a go. And then when I think about investors, I think they can really catalyze commercial NBS success through linking investment with market access. And this already happens. If you are a fleet manager that manages a bunch of huge purse seiners in the Western Indian Ocean and you're raising money for another $50 million purse seine, you're going to raise that money oftentimes with a guaranteed buyer contract from some huge Japanese corporation that needs a bunch of tuna and doesn't have enough supply. Same with huge commercial avocado farms and Costco. The same thing should happen when you're investing in global south, regenerative farming place. Give us a guaranteed market in addition to some money, please. And that'll make it so we can just focus on developing a triple bottom line supply chain and not have to stress about looking for the market. Of course, that's not been my experience, but and you can always find the market, and we're finding the market, but it'd be a lot easier, to be a lot further along, and a lot more fast if that did happen in the first place. And so the last thing I'll say is, NGOs can de-risk investments in a few ways. The first is by allocating startups kind of pre-investable pilot stage financing. So this can be a ZSL accelerator program. This can be a ZSL grant program. It doesn't really matter, but there's clearly people that have ideas, have NBS startup ideas, and it's completely not investable. And you can find some friends and family if you have that network that you're from or whatever, but for most people, that's extremely challenging. And it creates a real lack of being able to get these initial concepts off the ground. And if they're commercially viable, sustainability viable, livelihoods viable, there are interested investors all over the world who will follow up and invest with pre-seed rounds or seed rounds. But we need that initial kind of grant funding accelerator program to exist. Additionally, a lean startup in its very early stage can't afford to have a fisheries PhD on its payroll. And so in the future, if we're successful, we absolutely will have that. But for now, we can't afford it. And that's where NGOs come in to kind of fulfill that role, help us with M&E, help us with developing privatized fisheries management models. And the last thing is NGO budgetary expenditure. I love knowing what my NGOs have from a money standpoint and what they're planning to spend it on. Because if they want to build a brand new ice plant, that's great. But if I have an existing ice plant and I really need 30 coolers and that's 1/10 the price and that's going to make these fishermen fish more sustainably and make a lot more money, let's do that instead, perhaps. I would love to see it at the table so I can make some suggestions. So anyway, that's been my experience. These are my thoughts. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. It's a real honor. Thank you, James.
Great to see business growing. Last but not least, want to hear from Edwina, our fantastic and dynamic Philippines country director, for our regional manager in Southeast Asia, Ruben Clements. Now, it's been a real privilege to work with you on your department work. I look forward to hearing more about it.
Mabuhay everyone. As you can tell from my accent, I'm not Filipino, but I'm from Singapore originally, so she's the real deal. She's Filipino.
Yeah, that's Singapore's president. Not so bad.
Today I'm going to give you an idea of what the Philippines office is doing for community-led mangrove restoration in the Philippines and how the private sector can contribute And I'm a conservation scientist by training, but
He's our PhD.
I've been forced to dive into the world of finance because, as Martin pointed out just now, the traditional models of financing aren't working, grants are not sustainable, so I had to come in and help.
So before you say this though, I just want to say we've talked about a whole lot of high levels with finance and retail and all sorts of very global things. Ruben and I are here to represent the actual people on the ground who are living among and working among the resources that we're talking about. So give us a moment to just sort of sit back and put yourself into Nana and Lisa's shoes.
And this is probably one of the most rewarding moments of me working in conservation, having meeting people. And Nana Alicia, she's a member of the Pradana Fisherfolk Association in Region 6 in the Philippines. So this wonderful woman with James over there, as you can see, James wearing the same shirt there, his favorite shirt. So, when we went to the field, we're trying to save mangroves, trying to improve mangrove biodiversity, and this wonderful woman came up to us. She's about 75 years old. She told us, "Thanks so much for the funding for this project. Now I can smile." Why? Because at least they couldn't afford dentures. And with the funding with the salaries she's earning from bagging saplings for mangrove restoration that we're doing, she can now afford to smile. So this is probably, I guess, one of the most memorable things. And it's a perfect example of nature-based solutions, right? I'm sure some of you have heard the buzzword, what is nature-based solution? Well, anything that provides co-benefits, for wildlife and people. And this is one example of the NDS projects that James pointed out just now, we're developing around the region. So I'm going to pass it over to Edwina to tell us a bit about the fishing community and what else we're doing in the Philippines.
So in my book, Nature-Based Solutions combines, not just benefits the communities, but allows communities to lead and make decisions about the resources that they use. And these NBS activities should contribute to higher biodiversity, which, as we know, a more biodiverse forest or mangrove means more ecosystem services, including the climate. Against climate. So I don't like to separate climate and NBS. I think NBS has a seat at the climate table, and so do communities. They should have a seat in terms of making decisions about the resources that they use. So this group of lovely ladies are working with us, with ZSL, to not only nurture the seedlings, but they have actually improved our germination techniques for seafront mangrove species. So we actually came up with a standard and they experimented around those protocols and made them better. So this, for me, is a definite step in the right direction. This is an example of what we've done in the past and this was a 10-year engagement. It started off in 2009 as an abandoned fish pond, and we through protection and some planting, allowed natural regeneration to happen with the communities who recognized the importance of having mangroves in the area. And from 2018 to now, we've seen only growth and an increase in biodiversity in the area. So, these things can happen. So this is maybe the happy story that we want to hear, but definitely they can happen with the right support and investment and by allowing communities to lead the way. This is another project that ZSL and communities worked on together. The area was severely eroded from a number of projects and activities. Like there were fish ponds, there was a road, there was erosion, there was sea level rise, and the area was unplantable. So we worked with engineers. The communities asked for some help to regenerate the area. We worked with engineers who helped to design this community-built breakwater, which has led to accretion of substrate. And this the area on the left, on my left rather, used to look like what was on the right. And sort of 10 to 15 years later, we've had amazing growth and definite benefits from having the mangroves there. Is it the last one? Last thing, maybe? So the other sort of flagship program that we run in the Philippines is helping communities to establish village savings and savings groups, savings and loan groups, what we call COMSCAs, or Community Managed Savings and Credit Associations. These are funds so these are groups of people that come together and put their money together, and it could be, a share in this group could be as little as 50p to a pound per cycle, and they put their money together, and they've been able to have sort of save enough to be able to buy dentures, take their children to the doctor when needed, because in the Philippines, medical care is not free. And also they've been able to put money into an environmental fund which helps them either support their bantay gubat or forest volunteer forest rangers, and other environmental projects that they've decided on or developed by themselves, actually. So this has been a great success across the Philippines. So yeah.
I'm just going to round off by just highlighting some of the challenges that we face in developing NBS projects, and what we're working on right now is a blue carbon project together with the team. And whenever we speak to investors, right, the question is about scalability. Can you scale up? So mangroves, for example, are fragmented by nature. It's not easy. It's also decreased areas for planting mangroves in the seafront. So that's why it's a challenging aspect for us. But we also kind of lack pre-financing for project development. So there's some project developers here today in the audience, which you can speak to. But there are also other countries that will highlight. Beyond Malaysia, beyond Philippines, there are all those officers at the back there, countries at the back. You can scan their QR code at the banner. You can find out about the projects that are happening as well, apart from the Philippines, that require some financing for project development. Also, some of the challenges we face are companies still stuck in this CSR mindset. There's tree planting, which we are trying to move away. So, any of you at the private sector here, the countries that are still planting trees just for the sake of it, need to again change their mindset and move towards really investing in nature-based solutions projects. And how can the private sector contribute to mangrove conservation? Well, sort of what Sophie mentioned just now, with the British retail, you can participate and help influence public policy. That's a great start. You can also assess your biodiversity risk in your portfolios, which is what Fergus and Scottish Widows are doing at the moment, so we can do that. So talk to us later after this. And finally, co-develop high integrity, green or blue financial products in countries where you have a presence. And as I said just now, it's not just Philippines that have mangroves, there's countries like Mozambique, Kenya, India. So all those information is available on the banners, and the people here, put up your hands, those who are our country directors. We have Mozambique, Kenya, Nepal, India, Mongolia. Talk to these wonderful people, and Thailand with me.
Somewhere
there, yeah. At the back there, right? Okay, so talk to them to find out more about how you can participate. Again, we need more conversation on mangrove bonds. Martin talked about it just now. That we need to have this conversation to continue. And right now, come visit us in the Philippines or talk about this evening.
Yeah,
if you want to find out more
yes.
About what we're doing. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Adrina, for reminding us what conservation really looks like.
Thank you very much.
thank you to all of the speakers we've had tonight, and thank you to all you guys for listening so attentively. I am very aware I am the last thing standing between you and an open bar, so I'm not going to speak very much longer. But I just wanted to say, we've mentioned throughout the night that we are actually in our 10th year of our SPOT initiative. So this has been a long journey for us, and we really hope that this is useful data for tackling biodiversity and deforestation. So I want to say a big thank you to my team, who are in the room tonight, who are working on this project now, and to some ex-SPOT members who are in the room who have joined us again, so Caroline, Chris, Esther and others, thank you so much. To the existing team who are also building out this wonderful program of work in nature-based solutions and supporting conservation enterprises around the world, as well as all of our country office managers in the room. So do, as Ruben I think has adequately said, spend the next 45 minutes quizzing our country teams and learning a lot more about ZSL's conservation impact on the ground, because we are all very passionate people about conservation and we'll never stop talking about it. So please join us for drinks and canapes at the back. If you would like to go on an animal tour, we'll be downstairs at 8:30, and please leave these at the entrance as you leave the building. Other than that, thank you very much.